Okay, Troubleshooting 101. These are just a few issues that have been brought to me, or what I see more often than not, and I'll sort of proceed through them in an order that makes sense to me. First and foremost, when you're going to troubleshoot, there are a couple things that you need to know about your machine or understand about your machine for some of these troubleshooting techniques to make sense. And the first of which is really we just take a look at some of your basic options. And depending on your version of Windows, you're going to have either the start button or the word start. But if you click on that, your first options are shut down, switch user, lock, sleep, hibernate, restart, and once again shut down. And I'll just go through each of these real quickly. Switching users is for a machine that multiple users are accessing it, and you can leave one user logged on and switch to another without having to log either of them off. Locking is how you can lock your computer in whatever state it is. Like for example, if I've got a process that's running and may run for another 15 minutes, I don't want anybody to disturb it, but I'm not going to be by the computer. I can lock it, and that way that process can continue uninterrupted. Sleeping will take all of your current processes, uh, store them in RAM, and then shift your computer to a very low power state. In this case, you can wake it back up within seconds and return the computer to the state it was prior to sleeping. Hibernating is similar, except that instead of RAM, whatever you're working on is then stored locally on your hard drive. And once again, the computer is powered down, or at least to a very low power state. Um, really, you can think about these in two ways. This would be short term, this would be long term. So if you're going to be away from your computer for a short period of time, sleep a much longer period of time, hibernate. I'll explain the difference between RAM and hard drive in a moment or so. But the only problem I've ever run into with hibernate is that some computers require a key combination to wake it up. And if you don't know that key combination, well, you're going to have a hard time getting your computer out of its hibernating state. Restarting, sometimes called rebooting, or those of us who've been working with computers for long enough will call it a reboot. And all you're really doing there is you're powering the computer down, ending all of its processes, cutting the power, and then restarting fresh. Shutdown does the exact same thing, except it's not starting again. It's down, shut down, and you would use this when you're not expected to be using the computer anytime soon. So I'll mention when shutting down or restarting are important. But again, you'll want to know a couple things about your computer, and they're easy to find. In fact, you can do it in a variety of different ways. But if you go to your start menu, and again, depending on your version of Windows, this is not going to look exactly alike. But what we're actually looking for is Control Panel. Sometimes it's going to be right in this menu, or you'll see it as, in my case, it's under Settings and then Control Panel. Click on Control Panel, you'll open it up, and this will be displayed in a variety of different ways. Currently I have the small icons. You might also see categories. I prefer the small icon so I can see everything at once instead of trying to determine what category Windows has decided these options fall. But what we're interested in at this point is System. And if you click on System, it'll bring up some information for you. And right here it tells you that your processor is an Intel Core i5 operating at 2.6 gigahertz. I have installed 4 gigabytes of RAM, and the system type is a 64-bit operating system. These things don't necessarily have to mean much of anything to you, but it is important to understand that this is your RAM, and RAM, or random access memory, is your computer's working memory. You can think of it a lot like your own short-term memory. It's the kind of things that are going on in your head as you're talking, as you're thinking. It's not the memory of getting on a school bus when you were 7 or playing soccer when you were 15. That's all long-term stuff. That's way back in the back. RAM is what's happening right now. I like to think of these two things working in conjunction, your processor as the brain. This would be your thinking space, your RAM. If you think about it, your processor, let's say we got the top of the line processor, that's your Ferrari, right? So you got a very fast vehicle. You need RAM to operate that vehicle. RAM would be like your road space. So if you had a computer with a great processor and no RAM, it'd be like leaving your Ferrari in the garage. So these two work in conjunction. Now you've got 4 gigabytes of RAM depending on your operating system and depending on your computer itself. You may have a much larger amount of RAM. The amount of RAM is dependent on the machine and dependent on how much you paid for it. But generally, the more RAM, the better. So RAM is memory. And this is where things often get confusing. A lot of times I'll have someone ask me, well, my computer's running out of memory. What they are generally referring to when they say that is hard drive space. All right, a lot of times I'll hear this one in reference to iPads in particular, as they'll say my iPad is running out of memory, when again they mean storage space, because you've downloaded all these applications, you're actually occupying all of the available storage. So the difference between the two is here you got 4 gigabytes of RAM, random access memory. The hard drive itself is going to be much longer. And just to show you that, you can do this in a variety of different ways. One way of which is to right-click Windows Explorer, but you also have a My Computer or Computer icon. If you just click on Computer, My Computer, or Explorer, it's going to show you what's going on physically with your computer. And there's going to be a lot of different things in here. What we're interested in right now is the C drive, C colon, or your local disk, hard disk. And this shows me that I have 360 gigabytes free of 450 gigabytes. This is your storage. This is your primary source of storage. This is like the chest of drawers. That's where everything goes long term. Short term, long term. Now, the reason I bring this up in relation to troubleshooting is because as you're operating your computer is using RAM to create these processes, to use these processes, and to work with whatever it is that you're doing. Whether it's typing up a document, playing a game, whatever it is, you are using RAM. So RAM, much smaller than your available hard drive space, but they don't do quite the same thing. RAM, again, is much faster. It's random access. It's like the difference between a DVD and a VHS cassette. You know, DVD, you can randomly access that disc at any location. You can quickly move from scene to scene or chapter to chapter. Whereas an old video cassette, you'd have to fast forward, rewind, sequential. It takes a lot longer. Well, that's what we have that RAM for. It's for processing quickly and doing things quickly. But RAM also happens to be volatile, which means it requires an electric current. And I'm sure we've all had this experience where you've been working on something, power goes out, and what happens? Well, yeah, if it hadn't been saved, you're going to lose whatever it was you were working on. Fortunately, these days, most applications do have an autosave feature, so you're not going to lose everything. But it wasn't all that long ago where you could be working for an hour, and if you hadn't manually saved your document or whatever it is you were working on, well, it's going to go bye-bye if the power should go out. So because it's volatile and requires that electric current, rebooting will always clear anything that happens to be in RAM. Powering down is going to clear that RAM. And this becomes important as just like our own minds and your own short-term memory and your own thought processes, they can get jumbled up. There are times where you can do so many things at once that your available RAM is used up. And if all that RAM is being used, the next thing you try to do, it's going to be much slower because basically your computer has to finish a process, move it out of RAM so that it can move the new process in or the new set of instructions in. So if you're ever at the point where things are slowing down dramatically, The first thing you ought to do is check to see how many windows you have open, how many different processes you are running, and start to shut some of those down. That may help. That's step number one. Step number two is going to be rebooting, because there are times where that RAM gets all jumbled up, your computer just can't release it, and let's say your keyboard starts acting funky, your computer just is doing things that are not normal. It doesn't seem to be behaving properly. A good, I don't know, 8 out of 10 times, it's probably going to be RAM related. So powering your computer down, restarting it, rebooting it is going to clear that RAM, bring it back up, starting fresh. And a lot of times that will resolve your issue. So if you're on the phone and a tech person tells you to restart, they're not just telling you to restart so you'll go away for a while. Restarting, in many cases, is going to correct your problem. However, restarting multiple times, not so much. Remember, all you're doing is trying to clear that RAM. So if it doesn't work the first time, it's a good chance it's not going to work the second time, third time, fourth time, fifth time. I've been told many times I've already rebooted 7 times. Well, again, if the first time didn't help, the next 6 are probably not going to help either. So, because of the nature of RAM, it is important to reboot as a step number 1 or a step number 2. Again, check your processes, reduce the number of things you have going on, and then reboot, because you're going to be asked to reboot anyway